Hello, you wonderful people. If you haven't already, make sure you sign up to our Patreon account. The link will be in the description of this podcast, but you can also go to patreon.com/Earthly Delights Pod. For as little as €4 a month, you can help us out and become part of our little community. You'll get early access to all of the pods, and you'll also get a monthly newsletter from myself and Jim. So basically, two monthly newsletters where we'll talk about stuff that's going on in our own personal lives and what we've been thinking about/inspired about. We also are asking you guys to get involved with the podcast. So you can send in questions for our upcoming guests, or you can suggest to us people or topics who you would like us to interview and explore further. We love you. We hope that you love us. And hopefully, just by giving us as little as €4 a month, that's basically, it's not even a pint in London, that you can help us become an even better podcast. Thank you all.
Ciao amici. This is our first Italian guest. Not our last, but our first Italian guest. And this week is Elisa Fazio. Elisa is a certified Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga teacher. She's a certified trauma-informed yoga teacher from the Trauma Conscious Yoga Institute in Austin, Texas. She also has certificates in applied polyvagal theory in regards to yoga, like embodiment strategies for trauma recovery. And I just felt that Elisa was the right person to get on to try and tackle the difficult area, the multifaceted area of trauma and yoga. Elisa and I first bonded over our love of Gabor Mate. Yes, that really happened like that. I met her during my summer trip in Italy, and we've kept in touch ever since. I wanted to have her on the podcast to discuss the practice of yoga's potential to calm our nervous system and to help us reduce the impact of trauma and how it might impact on our lives. Trauma is a heavy, complicated and multifaceted concept, but amongst top trauma experts in the world, such as Bessel Van De Kolk, Gabor Mate, Janina Fisher and Steven Porges, just to name a few, trauma is something pretty much that every human deals with, both physically and mentally on some level. In this podcast, we talk a bit about trauma, but really we need a whole series of podcasts to unpack trauma. And so we hope that this podcast opens you up to a new understanding of trauma and how trauma lies within the body. Trauma-informed yoga is a practice designed to facilitate more options and possibilities for those in a yoga class, which is something, as Elisa points out in the podcast, traumatized people have rarely had in their lives, this sense of control, or at least that's how their nervous system or body had perceived it. This was one of the most challenging podcasts I've ever been a part of. I'm sure, same for Seb, because of its intricate nature, but I really enjoyed it and I hope you take something from it. If you would like to learn more about Elisa and her work, I've left loads of the necessary links in the show notes. Also, if you want to learn more about trauma, I've listed some recommended videos below in the show notes also. But thanks for listening, guys. This is a tough topic, but necessary in the traumatized world we live in. And yeah, I really hope you take something from it. Thanks a million. All the best. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Earthly Delights podcast. You might think, Jim and Seb, like, you're always talking about Italy. You love Italy. You keep on talking about, why haven't you had an Italian guest on? It's a very good question. And we've been waiting for the right Italian guest to come on. Today is the day. Elisa Fazio, benvenuta.
Grazie.
Come stai?
Bene, thank you. I'm really good. Thank you.
Good.
Nice to see you.
It's great to have you on. It's great to have you on because this is an area, obviously, you know, I have a big interest in. And I really wanted someone to come on the podcast who I think has the skills to attack this topic beautifully, carefully, because it's it's a heavy topic that needs consideration, and we've been talking for the last like 6 months or so, and really looking forward to being able to air this out for our trusted listeners. Before we start going in and you telling us about how you got into yoga and trauma-informed yoga, I was thinking it would be nice if you could just give us a little bit of a breathing exercise, because, you know, and I've been thinking about this for a while. It's like, people listening to this, right? People could have had a fantastic day of work. They could be on the way to work. They could be walking during the weekend. We don't know what's going on with them. But I really like the idea of basically if we just take 60 seconds, all of a sudden we're all in a more similar headspace, right? A more similar like frame of consciousness. So if you could do like a quick breathing exercise for all of us to bring us back, get us ready for the big topic ahead.
Yes, absolutely.
Sarà bellissima.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
So we can maybe start putting the right hand on our lower abdomen, on the belly. Maybe start taking a few breaths here. And really feeling our belly going against the right palm. And whenever we exhale, the belly is going again back towards the spine. And we do this a few times, inhaling and exhaling. I really feel the movement of our right palm going towards the spine. And maybe if it's available for us, we may want to allow our exhalation to relax our shoulders. And maybe with each breath, maybe we can notice the feelings around the face, under the eyes. See if we can relax our jaw. And while we are noticing our breath, we may also recognize that the pattern of our breath start changing a little bit. Maybe expanding, or maybe there is a swallow happening, or a sigh, or a yawn. And maybe we can still take a couple of deep breaths. Really, maybe considering to lower down our exhalation and making that a little bit longer. And then maybe we can start coming back into the space. And maybe we can look around in the room where we are, or if we are outside, we can just gaze around and reaching with our eyes to a spot in the room and coming back.
Thank you.
That was beautiful.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, I feel good. Seb, how do you feel?
Feel perfect. Very
Beautiful.
Okay.
First of all, can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up to be interested in trauma and yoga? How did it all begin for you? Where does it all start?
Okay. So, actually it all started during a yoga teacher training that I had in Thailand back in 2016. Because during this teacher training, we had a few pranayama, which are breathing techniques, that were supposed to calm us down and relax us. While actually during these techniques, I was more agitated, and I was actually having all those symptoms that are actually recognized of trauma symptoms. So I was shaking, I was sweating, I was experiencing a lot of discomfort in the body, and not only in the body, but in the mind too. So I was really feeling like in danger during a few breathing techniques. And I also want to mention that this is not what usually happens during breathing techniques in yoga. So most of the yoga breathing techniques are fine. But for some people, as that was for me, so this was my case, but probably not only me, some breathing techniques can actually activate some symptoms of trauma. So they create again a situation where the body is again re-traumatized. And we are going to discover this why during this interview. But that was the first time where I realized that there was something more going on that I had to take in consideration on the physical level. I was coming from a long psychotherapist, so psychotherapy. I was in psychotherapy for around 11 years. So I had a lot, plenty of talk therapy, as you can understand. But, and that was really precious for me, was really important. And I always suggest to basically anyone that I meet to go to therapy, because we all need therapy to some degree. But at the physical level, I need to do some somatic work, and I wasn't aware about that till that moment, till that episode at this teacher training.
Okay, and before we talk about why you had to do somatic work, you had to address the body, can you give the listeners just a bit more of a background in terms of what were you struggling with?
Yes.
So you said you saw a psychotherapist for 11 years.
Yeah.
What initiated you to go to the therapist, and what were you working through?
Yeah. So many years ago, so around the age of 19 years old, I was struggling with eating disorder. So my psychotherapy start there.
Okay.
And then after around 3 years of psychotherapy, I start feeling better. So my symptoms eventually start to improve. So I didn't have really the whole activation of eating disorder and bulimia and whatever there was at the time. But then during the psychotherapy, you start going deeper and deeper and deeper to the root cause of that, of those symptoms that you have. So I reach a point after maybe 8-9 years of psychotherapy where I went in a very dark hole of my life, and I was diagnosed with PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and from there I start having panic attacks and other symptoms that are connected to PTSD. And for who is listening to us right now, if they are going through that, I promise you, you can get better, you can get over that, and you can 1,000,000% manage those symptoms. It can be like a long road, a long path to get there, but it's very subjective. It can go away in 1 year, 3 years, 2 months, 3 weeks, we never know. But the more knowledge you have about this topic, the more you know about your own body, and the more you have the opportunity of really using valuable, good tools to overcome all the symptoms and get better and eventually heal from PTSD or panic attacks or anxiety even. Anxiety is another big topic, and most of us suffer of anxiety to a certain degree. And it's really more complicated than what it looks like, because anxiety is not just like, oh, I'm a little bit worried about something. Anxiety is just a roller coaster of different feelings that can change day after day and can be like physically experiencing like a constant shaking a little bit, or maybe feeling our heart rate increasing out of the blue for no reason during the day, or maybe having a very sound breath, I don't know how to say, very noisy breath, or that can be maybe scanning with our eyes, detecting with our eyes wherever we are. Like, let's say we are in a new environment. Of course, we look around to understand, people that are around us, but for an anxious person, this might become, where is the threat? Where is the possible danger? So there is a different way the anxious person or the traumatized person move their eyes in the environment where they are, because they are looking, they have a bigger part of the brain that is called amygdala, which is responsible of detecting possible danger in the environment. And they are just trying to understand if the place they are in, it's safe enough. So there are many, many different ways to understand after this knowledge that we can get, if the person in front of us is going through an acute state of trauma in that moment. Having said that, 99% of people have trauma in their body. So
Lisa, I'm glad you mentioned that, because you said that you were diagnosed with PTSD, and there may be some people who really resonate and say, yeah, something similar happened to me. But there also could be people listening saying, PTSD, I thought, people, maybe they come home from war, they get diagnosed with PTSD, or there's this huge violent act in someone's childhood.
Yeah.
Then that's definitely traumatizing. Can you enlighten us regarding trauma in your definition, your understanding, and how our body basically can pick up trauma?
Before that, Lisa, I'm just adding a piece. When I've been diagnosed with PTSD, I was not a veteran, so I was not coming back from a war or something like terrible, major. I was actually working in a call center, so I was a customer service inbound, and I was doing a kind of job where, and the people who are listening to us, they may know the feeling, I was repeating all day, every day, the same thing over and over again. And probably that job in that time of my life triggered a sense of not having choice within me, which is the main point of those who experience trauma. So the first definition of trauma is the lack of choices that people experience during a certain event. So in that episode of my life, in this call center, I had that experience, probably combined with other situations that I was experiencing in my life. And this altogether creates a diagnosis of PTSD. So I had a very regular job. I was not, like a visible crazy person, or, I was like you can see me now, So because we often connect this to drug addicts or, alcoholics or, people who are really fuck up with their life.
People who might be screaming.
But exactly. But no, this can happen to anyone. And about the definition of trauma, I'm actually borrowing a definition from Bessel Van De Kolk, who said trauma is fundamentally an interruption of our ability to stay in the here and now. And I'm adding to this sentence, to be in the here and now and feeling safe. Because maybe I can experience be in the here and now, but I'm not feeling safe enough to explore that state of feeling present. So it's very...
Elisa, question. Maybe there's people listening and they say, Yeah, I find it hard to stay in the present moment. But I definitely wouldn't say I'm traumatized.
Okay.
Would you consider that perhaps people who don't even know it are somewhat traumatized in that, like, on a deeper level their body is we talk about the nervous system and fight or flight, but would you say that the body is finding it difficult to stay in the present moment as a result of, like you said, not having a choice maybe in a particular period of your life?
First of all, I believe we need to distinguish people who are already in the path of detecting what is good for them or not, or what feelings may come up in certain situation, because many people, and I was one of them, they are just so used to live in a state of hyperactivation, let's call it like that, or trauma, that they don't see the difference. They say, they maybe think that they didn't go through a very big trauma, or they didn't have anything major in their life. But maybe they did, but not in the event itself, but in the way that their nervous system respond to that event. So just to understand what trauma is, we need to speak a little bit about what kind of trauma, what type of trauma we can find. So there are two different, even three type of trauma, which is the first trauma is the developmental trauma. So it's the one that creates during childhood. And just to give some example, is the kind of trauma where maybe we grow up in an environment which is really violent, or maybe our caretakers have some kind of addiction, or we feel just neglect, or maybe we have parents which are divorced, and maybe we don't really understand where we need to locate ourselves in the sense of getting a feeling of family, or maybe we feel abused. This can be physically, or can be just mentally. But I'm using the word just because I don't know which word is appropriate in English. But actually psychological abuse can be even worse in a sense than just physical abuse, you know. And there can be so many things that can create a trauma. But what we need to understand is that trauma is basically, in short, an event that is taking place in our life too fast and too much. So it's something that we don't really have time to digest, to understand what's happening. We don't have time to realize how to face the problem, process. Exactly, that's the word. And there is also another kind of trauma, which is something that we usually connect to when we speak about trauma, and is the big event, like a war or a tsunami or a fire or something like this. So these are the big incidents that we can came across, maybe, I hope never in our life. But that's the most common type of trauma. Having said that, the developmental trauma is more difficult to work with compared to the second trauma. Okay. Because when we have trauma during childhood we have different neural pathways that start to form. And they are responsible of the way our brain is actually communicating to our body, and what our brain is telling about different situations, about if something is safe or something is not safe. Let's say, for example, I grow up in a family where I'm really used to violence. Maybe I'm just taking an example. Maybe my father is beating up my mom, or something else is happening, or they are drinking a lot. I become so used to that environment because that will become my kind of nervous system adaptation to survive. That this will become also part of my neural pathways. So the way my brain function, I will see the situation like a normal situation, or maybe I understand in my mind, especially in adulthood, that that's not normal, but within me, profoundly, I will still take that like my kind of comfort zone, like something that, yes, can happen and it's fine, it's family. So that's also why it can happen that many women, or men, I don't know, many women end up with very violent men, or they get really abused in relationship, because they think at the deeper level that's normal. So they don't have a mechanism of rejecting someone because, oh, this is unhealthy for me. I know here that it's unhealthy, but something within me is still trying to recreate the same condition of trauma and have the opportunity eventually to overcome the trauma, giving a different response to the event itself. I don't know if this makes sense because it's
perfect sense.
Yes,
I wanted just to clarify something. You said that this would be like developmental trauma, which we would suffer originally with during childhood. I just wanted to clarify what we mean by childhood. Do we mean, because you talk about the neural pathways being created, so do we mean from 0 to 25, which is when most scientists would agree that that's when your brain is fully functional, or is it before then? Is there like a cutoff there? Is it like when you're from 0 to 13 years old, or 0 to 15 or 18? Do you have like an age range so that people might hear you and go, oh, well, I was fine during childhood, in their mind thinking like, oh, 0 to 10, nothing ever happened to me. But then this really horrible episode happened when I was like 17, but that's not developmental because I'm no longer a child when I'm 17. Whereas maybe scientifically speaking, that might still be classed as developmental trauma.
Sì. The first 8 months are the most important. So in the first 8 months, we really go into a state of we are experiencing our first co-regulation with another human being, and that will be our caretaker. That can be our mom or someone else. And the first 8 months are the most important for the co-regulation, and I'm going to explain very short this. But as you said, that can be from 0 to maybe 12, 13 years old, or 0, 8 years old. This is anyway pretty much the age. But there is this important phase of our life from 0 to 8, where we experience this co-regulation with our caretaker, as I said. And co-regulation is basically having someone, of course, taking care about our own needs. Because when we are in that age, and even after that, but especially in our first years of life, we can't really self-regulate our emotion. We can't eat alone. We can't do so many things alone. So we are totally dependent on our caretaker. And if for
Gabor Mate calls it the healthy attachment, right?
The healthy attachment, yeah. Many of us have experienced maybe an unhealthy attachment. And we can maybe discover this in another moment of our life where we get what is actually called attachment injury. So the first thing we are looking at, even in our relationship, is a way of constantly co-regulate with our partner in a way that is even probably, I would say, too much, And so this is what many experts on the field of trauma, they spend a lot of research. So I'm not gonna get really deeply into that because it's not really what I want to talk about tonight, and that would be even too much out of my scope of practice. But yeah, there is a lot to say about all these moment of the child and this co-regulation. What I can also say is the co-regulation is also very important in the way where we will interact with other adults and with other people during our adulthood. And yeah, so it's about face, it's about muscle face. And so in yoga for trauma or trauma-informed yoga, I would say, we also work a lot with the face muscles. Because actually this is what we were looking at our caretaker to co-regulate ourselves. So if our mom look at us in a very loving way, relaxed, we could actually self-regulate our nervous system. While if even now, if someone is looking at us saying, "Oh, don't worry, just relax," and they are just, contracting some muscle in their face, it doesn't matter how lovely they will ask to do something, but we will not be really able to regulate our nervous system because there is an internal system within us that doesn't sense that like a safe person for us in a way.
Elisa, I wanted to ask a question. Someone who has developed developmental trauma and has basically grown up with whatever it is that they've stored in their bodies and in their psyche.
Can you say again? Sorry.
Sorry, I want to say that for someone who's maybe developed developmental trauma, has gone through their childhood and had a traumatic episode and grown up, and they're now, maybe mid-20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and they've lived all their life with this trauma obviously held within the body and within the psyche. I wanted to ask, how can someone, the body keeps a score, but if you've grown up with it your whole life, your body just feels, to you, that's how your body feels. You don't know that your body should feel less tense or whatever it may be. It's not like an injury. If I break my leg tomorrow, I know, oh shit, my leg isn't working how it was working yesterday. I better go to the doctor and get this fixed. Whereas if I've lived my whole life and my body's the way it is, I just think that everyone lives like this, and that's just how. So how does someone come to you and say, well, I think I've gone, like you said, I've gone through psychotherapy for 10 years. I feel like I've done fairly well at figuring out the psyche. That's kind of on track now, and I've got the tools to help me with that. But I still feel like there's trauma in my body, because I feel like for someone to kind of do that own analysis, that own diagnosis must be so hard, because I don't know how you would recognize it, because there can't be many obvious factors.
Yeah. Maybe you need, of course, to experience a contrast of what feeling calm or feeling safe is in your own body, and you can have an experience of that when you start something like yoga or some other practices which are somatic based, and this is the only way to experience the difference of what's the current situation and how good you can actually feel trying to practice somatic therapies, whatever that is, And of course, if someone is coming to me, this is because his life quality probably have room for improvements in a sense, because maybe they want to feel better. So there is a deeper knowing within themselves that there is something wrong. Yeah. They may have not really experienced a sense of feeling safe or feeling really calm, but they know there is something wrong because, of course, the quality of life get really impacted. Get really, yeah.
And I just wanted to ask, just to like make a real clear distinction here. what you're saying is that to alleviate stress or trauma in the body through movement isn't like through any movement. So, for example, it's not just enough to say, "Oh, I'm active now. I've gone to the therapist. I mentally got that all in track, and now I go on a run 3 times a week, and that's me." You're saying that like it has to be specific sets of movements or practices, whether it's yoga but some somatic movements. It's not enough to say, "Oh, well, now I've taken up football. I go running. I take my dog on a long walk, and I'm an active, healthy person." That's not going to help get rid of the trauma that's stored in the body. Is that correct?
It depends. It depends where you are at with your own life, and from your nervous system perspective, what is good for you. Because maybe for you, running is really good because you are creating some serotonin in your body, and your cortisol level, of course, will decrease. We all know about the running, the benefits, or just walking in nature. Everything is perfect, but it may be not enough for you. You may need some movement which are really scientific based. So some movement that will create new neural pathways in your body, and there are many movements, for example, in the trauma-informed yoga format that help you to completely shake out and reset your nervous system. Maybe not after the first session. I mean, after the first session, of course, you will feel better. Maybe the quality of your breath will be different, but you need to give everything some time to work on you. And just to reply to your question, for example, taking yoga as an example, there are different styles of yoga. So there is the more dynamic yoga, maybe the power yoga or the vinyasa yoga, which is very dynamic. So you really move fast, you do a lot of postures in 1 hour. There is hatha yoga, there is yin yoga, there are different styles. And maybe if I'm experiencing, for example, an hyperactivation of my nervous system, and I'm in this fight and flight mode, and maybe we will explain about this a little bit more. And, I'm completely stressed out, and going to a yoga class, which is dynamic, where I have my teacher that maybe speak loud to me, where I have to hold the postures for maybe a few breaths, where maybe my body just need to completely release, and just calm down and do something completely different, can actually re-traumatize the body even more. But I might not even realize that. Or I may kind of blame myself, saying, "Oh, everybody is coming out from this class really relaxed, except me. Maybe I wasn't good enough for this class. I wasn't good enough for yoga." So many people come to me and say, "Sorry, but I can't concentrate enough, so I can't do yoga." Or, "Oh, I'm too stressed for yoga tonight." Or that's why you're doing yoga, You don't need to, you shouldn't feel that calm to go to have a reason to practice yoga. You go there because you feel stressed out, completely overwhelmed. And yoga, the right kind of yoga, should be able to help you in a sense. So if I'm in a really active state, very dynamic class may be not good for me. I may need something more relaxing. But even in that kind of relaxing yoga, I need to have a teacher, which there is plenty of teachers that are really good with teaching classes in a very appropriate way. But I need to have a teacher that can really lead me during the class. And if I'm not feeling comfortable or about staying in a posture for a few minutes, can help me with that and give me option. And this is what trauma-informed yoga is about. Trauma-informed yoga would never put you in a situation where you have to stay in a posture for 3 minutes. or you have to breathe in that way, or you have to close your eyes. So there is a non-directive way we speak during the yoga class. It's all about options. You may feel to close your eyes because this is available for you tonight. You may want to keep your eyes open during the meditation. You may want to reach your arm through the sky, or maybe you feel that your arm need another movement outwards. Or maybe you want to explore to stay with your arm in this direction and maybe stay there for a few breaths, but feel free to come out anytime from this posture and maybe take a few breaths and moving your body differently. So everything is about different options in a way where it still makes sense. So there is no people running in the room because they feel to do so. It makes sense, but every posture have different possibilities. And this is beautiful because people who experience trauma in general, they had no choice. So the trauma get stored in their body because they didn't have any choice in the situation, at least at the level of their nervous system. And whenever you want, we will talk about this too, and so
Elisa, I just think this would be a nice movement into talking a bit more about trauma-informed yoga. For people who are like frustrated, they're going, "Oh, James, like here's another definition of trauma, or here's another." It's so complex, it's so multifaceted. If you're interested in learning more about this, we talk about people at the end of the show who you'd recommend, as well as reaching out to you. But I remember we were talking yesterday, and you said one of the other definitions of trauma is a disconnection from the body, and how that yoga is very effective in reconnecting you with the body. And it actually linked well with Seb's question. People who say like, how can someone who's 40 who's had trauma in their body know that because as you said, if you've never felt truly relaxed and calm in the present moment, and not under threat and not in a fight or flight situation, then you might not know. You might just think that's normal and take it for granted. So I guess it would be nice for you to talk about how we can reach a point where we acknowledge that being in a fight or flight all the time isn't healthy, and how the traumatized body or the traumatized nervous system can't delineate between an actual threat or a threat that isn't so dangerous, like you're just in the kitchen and someone walks in and you think they're looking at you funny and they're judging you, and then you start thinking, oh my god. But I guess this is a way for me to ask, how does the trauma-informed yoga bring us back into our body, bring us back into realizing that there's a deeper, calm, relaxing state that we can reach, and that the nervous system that was almost like hyperactive for much of our lives, we can have a bit more control over it. You were talking about control.
Yeah.
Can you expand on this, please?
First of all,
Thank you.
a way to understand if we are experiencing some form of trauma in our body, we hate people. This is the quicker answer that I can give. Usually people who hate other people, they are experiencing trauma in their body. And this sounds very simple in a sense, but when you kind of hate people, it's actually because you are in a sense of you're experiencing fear in your body, and there is a deeper reason. It's not because you are a bad person, but there is something within you that is detecting a possible danger from the outside. And maybe you experience daily life, like it's really a burden every day, and you can't sleep well, or maybe you are shaking a little bit, or again, as I said, maybe your breath become very short. Usually for very stressed people, the breath during the inhalation and exhalation will be like less than 3 seconds long. So usually when you are in a state of calmness or your nervous system is working better is going to last for 4-5 seconds, usually just naturally. But if we check our own breath during the day when we are really stressed, we will start breathing very, very quicker. And this is because our nervous system, our fight or flight mode will start to work, and we will come in a state of hyperactivation where all the blood in our body will go to our muscles, like if something is about to happen and we need to run away from that event or to fight to that event, So maybe we are just thinking about, oh my God, today I have so much going on. I still need to do this and that, and I will never make it. And so we are preparing our body to get very, very stressed out. And so our body, in that moment, our brain, the part of the brain that is called the reptilian brain, because it comes from reptiles, so we hereditate, I think is in English, this part of the brain from the reptiles too. In that part of the brain, we have these two different way of reacting to trauma and to stress. And so our body will prepare to a possible fight or flee. And there is another state that we can be in, which is the free state. And so this is something we experience even during developmental trauma. So that can be even a situation where we see our parents or someone else fighting each other. We don't really know how to do. We can't escape. We can't fight. But we are going through something, or we are staring at something that is too much to take in for us. So we go in the freeze mode. So we start to paralyze our body. That can be a feeling of paralysis, so we really cannot move the body, or can be an internal feeling of shutting down. So the shutting down mode is something that we can experience during adulthood as well. So when we are, for example, in a very emotional situation, or maybe we have an argument at work or somewhere else, we will have the feeling of shutting down our brain, or we will disconnect. Or maybe we are in intimacy with a partner, or maybe in another situation, we will take like a kind of dissociation. So we will take us internally to in another space. We will be there, and maybe from the outside, the person that is looking at us doesn't really notice the difference, so we are behaving normally. But inside there is a mechanism where we can disconnect completely from that situation and pretending to be somewhere else with our head, with our mind. So we are experiencing again an inability to be in the here and now.
Elisa, that's very interesting. You talk about how trauma-informed yoga is all about choice, and how many people who are experiencing trauma or have some trauma in the body, if they don't even think that they didn't have a choice, it's almost like their nervous system feels like it doesn't have a choice, like it feels like it's fight or flight. I was wondering, could you expand on your time, like your introduction into trauma-informed yoga, and how trauma-informed yoga helped you kind of calm your nervous system down?
Okay. So the first time I practiced yoga was during a power yoga class, which is not really yoga, by the way, but okay, let's take it on one side at the moment.
Yes.
And but then I start practice Ashtanga yoga, which is I don't know if you heard about Ashtanga yoga. Did you ever practice Ashtanga yoga?
I practiced Ashtanga yoga for about a year when I was in the Netherlands, and it's hard, right? It's very tough on the body.
Yes.
Very strict.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about your experience? So before I go on with Ashtanga yoga, so
For
so
sure,
maybe,
yeah. I
yeah.
mean, Ashtanga was my introduction into yoga seriously as well. Um, and I guess while I really appreciated the, I guess I appreciated the consistency of it. Like as you say, it's these movements over and over again. But I guess I was a bit frustrated maybe at myself, or felt that um, there wasn't a lot of possibilities to adjust if I couldn't do certain postures, because certain postures are very, very difficult, particularly if you're not flexible in the hips or the back. And so I took a lot from it. However, I felt like it was quite regimented and quite tough, and I often feel like a softer yoga would have been more beneficial for me.
Okay. So my experience with Ashtanga yoga, or at least from the perspective of my own nervous system, so I'm not gonna condemn or blame Ashtanga yoga at all. I know there are so many beautiful Ashtanga yoga practitioners that they really had regulate their nervous system with Ashtanga yoga. But in my case, and in many other people's stories, Ashtanga yoga is a very demanding practice, and it requires, as you said, a lot of discipline and a lot of stamina, and it can be very hard, not only on the body, but on the mind as well.
Okay.
First of all, during Ashtanga yoga, it's a very dynamic style of yoga. So it's you have many postures that you need to kind of perform in 1 hour or 1 hour and a half. It depends by how many postures you are able to do, and the pace you are learning. And you have a teacher that will offer you adjustment during your practice. So basically, you start with a lead practice, and then you go in what is called the Mysore practice. So you roll out your mat and you start with the same sequence every day. And there is the teacher that is walking around you and looking at you time to time. Of course, there are many people in the shala every morning, and he or she will offer you an adjustment based on how you are doing that posture. Those adjustments are really in connection, in a very direct connection with your body. So maybe the chest of your teacher will be touching your back, or will be touching your chest, or maybe his or her leg will touch another part of your body, maybe your hip or somewhere else. And what I discovered during my 4 or 5 years of Ashtanga yoga practice, practicing in different studios, so with different teachers, I realized that whenever the teacher was coming over next to my body, I would feel a feeling, I would experience a feeling of paralysis within my body. So I would basically kind of shut down my system in order to handle this proximity. I think this is the word in English. The proximity of the teacher, of the body's teacher next to my body. Or maybe if I felt safe enough with this teacher, because maybe I had the chance of knowing this teacher after or before the yoga class, or maybe I had the practice for a long period of time with the same teacher. In that case, maybe I felt a little bit better, more comfortable, but in most cases, I would just feel uncomfortable, and my body would just go in a state of kind of dissociation, which is not like shutting down and just looking like paralyzed, like from the outside. From the outside, you are still breathing, you are still moving, you are still performing whatever you're doing. But inside, something else is happening. So you are not really actually in your body. You are just moving, shifting your attention out of the body somewhere else. in order to do not have that experience of proximity with the teacher, proximity with the teacher. And so this made me realize of the importance of having a practice where I didn't really have hands-on me, like in that manner. And also, for me, the sequence was too dynamic, too much. And so probably in what we find in the trauma-informed yoga, it's a kind of yoga, it's a kind of style that it can be dynamic. So trauma-informed yoga is not for super traumatized people and no move more than this, and maybe can be very slow, can be more dynamic, but still in a very safe way. So we always offer different choices. You don't have to stay in a postures for a long period of time if you don't feel to. And the thing is that dynamic aspect of the practice and the very slow part of the practice are together. While in Ashtanga yoga, yes, you have sitting postures and standing postures, but in the sitting postures you will have to stay maybe for 5 breaths or sometimes for 10 breaths. That maybe it's not enough for my body. Maybe I need 30 breaths there, or maybe I need 5 sometimes, you know. So all of that again is not to blame Ashtanga yoga. It's just to explain how I get to trauma-informed yoga, because I realized that after my practice, my nervous system was like in overload. So I wasn't really feeling relaxed. Plus, in Vinyasa yoga, usually we use the Ujjayi breath, which is a breath that is very warming and creates some heat in the body. But if you don't perform Ujjayi breath, which is performed with the contraction of the glottis, maybe it's English, yeah. If you don't have the proper contraction, you will use another part of the throat, which actually put your nervous system in a more stress situation. So basically, if we breathe with the lower part of the throat, so the Ujjayi breath will look like. Can you hear the sound? They remind like the ocean breath, you know, the ocean sound. They call it the ocean breath. But if you breathe with the higher part, so like this, it's a kind of slight different sound, and this higher part of the throat is responsible of basically going into flight or fight mode again. So you feel very stressed during your practice. So I don't know if this really makes sense, but this was the main reason why I moved to another style. And I tried with Hatha yoga, Yin yoga, but they were too slow for me, and too slow often, especially when you are not guided by a teacher, can become again another version of trauma. So can be traumatic again for someone that need another way of nourish his nervous system. So we can go to collapse basically during the very slow practices.
And so for people who are thinking, does that mean that in a trauma-informed yoga class, you say we have options, and you say if someone wants to stay in a particular posture for 30 seconds or 30 breaths rather than 5 breaths, does that mean that a trauma-informed yoga class, it looks like someone will be doing one pose and then another person will be doing another pose? They don't have to follow like a strict routine?
Yeah, they don't have to follow any strict routine. They always have to check with their own body. Of course, there is a structure, so I give a class with different postures and breathing techniques, but they will always have the choice to maybe rest in another postures for a while and maybe join us back in another moment.
Okay.
Or maybe just stay on the mat during which looks weird, because if you go to a standard yoga class, you are expected to move your body, because otherwise people will look at you and say, what are you doing, Even the teacher, if you want, in a sense, While during this practice, these classes, you always have the choice to do whatever your body is asking for. If that's more nourishing for your body, for your system, if that's what resonates with you. So maybe one day warrior pose can be the right posture for you. Maybe another day you will need to be more time in baby pose, in child pose, or as we call it, the wisdom pose as well. And so
can you just, this might be a nice move into the next question as well, but can you talk to us about like a bit more about how trauma-informed yoga calms down the nervous system? Like in through what ways? You said that with Ashtanga yoga, you didn't feel relaxed after, you still felt like your nervous system was kind of fight or flight. Can you talk through ways in which the trauma-informed yoga can kind of calm the body down on a somatic level?
Yeah. So in trauma-informed yoga, it's a somatic practice, of course. But trauma-informed yoga has his main focus on the way we teach to other.
Okay.
So the tone of voice, the offering different choices, the language that we use. So for example, accordingly with the population to which I'm offering the yoga class, I will use maybe certain words or a type of language, and that will look maybe slightly different from the one that I'm using with another population.
Okay.
So for example, let's say I'm working with abused woman, like sexually abused woman. And maybe I will be very careful to use words like, this is for basically all trauma-informed classes, but I will be even more careful with this woman to use words like open your legs here, or touch your belly, or so I will use maybe words like lower abdomen, or maybe keep your leg a little bit distant, or maybe see if you can put your knees around your bolster. As opposed to open your legs and place the bolster in the middle, or other words or sentences that they look really inoffensive from someone that doesn't study about trauma.
Yeah.
But they are not, because words and the way we speak to certain population, but in general, actually, they have a very dramatic impact on people. So they can recall again a sort of trigger in the person that is listening during a yoga class, which should be safe and we should be, very inclusive. And they may feel uncomfortable, or they may connect the word with the experience that they have. So we try to be careful with the language.
Great.
Then the postures that we choose are very selective, and you can choose pretty much whatever postures that you want, even though there are different teachers that they say in trauma-informed yoga we should avoid hip opening postures. I don't personally agree with that because many people, they don't really have problems with hip opening, and again is about the choices that you give during the postures. For example, we use maybe also some props. We use like blanket, so if I'm like in a postures where my knee are open wide. Maybe I can place a blanket in the middle that can cover my genital area, can cover my abdomen. And so that will be really enough for my nervous system to feel safe. And also we use many postures, taking in consideration all the study on the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve of our body that connected the brain to the body. And there is a whole research on the vagus nerve made mainly by many researchers, but especially from Steven Porges that brought to us the polyvagal theory. And so there are different ways of regulating our nervous system based on the way of tonify, making tonificare. Tonify our nervous system. And this way can be bowing down, so forward postures, or maybe breathing in a certain way, so stimulating the throat in a certain way. Or maybe we have in yoga also the drishti, so the gaze movement, so that will be made in a certain way that could be beneficial to regulate these and to tonify this vagus nerve. Or other way of regulating the vagus nerve is by drinking cold water, gargling, maybe gargling for 1-2 minutes with cold water, singing, chanting mantras, or again breathing, so using the vibration in the throat, or I'm just thinking other way, but there are many different ways of regulating this nerve, and it's quite amazing how fast it works. So in trauma-informed yoga, we combine all the knowledge and really the richness of this polyvagal theory with the beauty of choosing an appropriate language for people that have been traumatized, which we all are traumatized, as I said previously. So it's a very inclusive class, so it's really suitable to anyone. You just need to experience what I'm saying, because now it's a lot of theory, but in practice you can just use and choose to practice trauma-informed yoga for the rest of your life and be a real yogi. So
the polyvagal theory is very interesting, and for anyone who might be interested, I would really highly recommend looking into Steven Porges. But I guess just to clarify on this question about the importance of calming the body down, and to like touch again just on Seb's question previously. Many people, thankfully, talking therapy is a lot more common now, and a lot of people are going to counselors, psychotherapists, and like yourself, psychoanalysts. For people who are undergoing that process or are interested in going that process, and they feel like, there is a little bit of trauma in me here, why would you say the therapy is not enough? Why would you encourage them to also address the trauma through the body?
Okay. We probably said before that talking therapy is a top-down approach.
Okay.
So it goes from the brain, from this area, and all what we can process at this level, send signals and send information to our body. But if the trauma is stored in the body, because the body keeps the score, as for the book of Bessel Van De Kolk, the trauma is still in my tissue. So there is someone that said the issues are in the tissues, and it's quite interesting, So maybe I can talk with my therapist, which is really a good thing to do, and I highly recommend anyone to try psychotherapy, because it really helps us to create a new narrative and see things in a different perspective. And but from the body perspective, if the trauma is still in the tissue, in the muscle, is still there. So it's not about talking about the topic that my muscle will release the trauma and that energy form, So it will need to shake it out, or my body needs to have an experience that can completely contradict the experience of trauma in the body. So during the trauma-informed yoga class, or maybe during also another style of yoga for other people, so that can be a different experience for someone else, Not everybody need to practice a trauma-informed yoga to heal. Maybe someone else is fine with hatha yoga, and that's totally fine too. But during a healing yoga class, you will have an experience of entering the posture. So the event is starting. Then you have holding the postures. And in that experience of holding the postures, you have the choice, or at least your nervous system will take the choice to dissociate from that event or be in the here and now. So really be there with the postures, breathing or moving or whatever that needs to be done. And then closing the postures. So I'm moving to another posture. So in that experience of beginning, holding, and then closing, there is actually the resolution that we want to find in the trauma.
Okay.
So the trauma is something that we didn't complete from the perspective of the event itself.
We can never fully process it.
Exactly. So the yoga gave us this experience of processing something and bring that to an end. So it's completed, is in the past, and we can move on. And this is what we want to do with therapy. We talk with our therapist, and what we are really aiming at is closing that event that caused us stress or trauma and move on with our life. The thing is that maybe to reach that state, we will need maybe 20 years of therapy, or maybe that would not even be enough, because I've been in psychotherapy for 11 years. And I'm so thankful that I had that therapy. It was one of the best things of my life. But I reached a point where I realized that was not enough. I need to do something else. It was not about my therapist. My therapist was the most precious woman, human being in the world. And trust me, I went so deep with my own life, childhood, parents, relationship, and you really dive deep into your old darkness, and you reach points that you weren't even aware to have inside. But then there is a stop, there is a limit, and the body keep the score. So the things are still in your body. And yoga for this is just amazing, to release all this stuff and really move forward with your life.
Do you think that's why many people, when they come out of the yoga studios, they don't really have grudges? It's really hard to walk out of a yoga session and go, "Oh, I'm still angry at that thing."
Yes, exactly. See, I'm so angry, but I'm grateful. I'm so thankful for this yoga.
This has been great. Before we close up, is there anything that I haven't really asked you, or that you think, oh no, this is important to say just before we finish?
God.
Maybe it would be nice for you to reaffirm for people listening with maybe with a PTSD diagnosis, or people struggling with an eating disorder, or like in a similar position to yourself, or someone with a loved one in a similar position to yourself, maybe to reaffirm that there are ways out there in which we can kind of process the trauma and reach like a more healing place.
Yeah, there are ways to come out of that. And of course, a psychotherapist. Psychotherapy in general, you really need a psychotherapy if you are going through this. So it's in my belief that only exclusively somatic therapy could not really be enough. So please refer to a real licensed, I think is the word, psychotherapy. And then, somatic therapy, that will be a great experience for you, but be aware of this format, because often people who suffer of panic attacks or PTSD or anxiety even, they go to a random yoga class and they don't actually find the support that they are looking for. And they believe that in order to do yoga, they need to feel calm or they need to get over this state of anxiety, of panic attacks, which is not true. So the trauma-informed yoga really give you the tools and the opportunity to have a real experience of yoga while you are really working on building up that self-compassion that help you through the healing process. This is a very, very important point. Something that really taught me, the trauma-informed yoga really taught me, it's self-compassion. And it's a very big word, because we are really used to talk about love yourself and give yourself some self-love. What is this self-love, What is this compassion about, I hate myself, And maybe having the opportunity of understanding that what you are going through, it's all about your nervous system right now in your life. There is nothing wrong with you. It's not your fault. There is really a physiological response to all the experience you are going through right now. And even just listening these words maybe can be really comforting for you. And maybe give you the space to look at yourself like a human being, with limits, limitation, with all the stuff that we are all going through, I'm an anxious person. I'm a natural anxious person. So when I'm imbalanced, I tend to go into anxiety symptoms, So of course I'm studying and I'm doing this stuff because it helps me. So I do other things to look after my mental health, which I believe this is another of your maybe chosen question. And mental health means, first of all, I'm saying something that may sound very silly, drinking a lot of water.
Yeah.
So when you are going through tough time, even a breakup, and I know this very well, as all of you looking at this, watching this interview, drinking a lot of water will change your days. Going for walks and eating properly, healthy food, nourishing food. So these, all these are the foundation of any healing process. Drinking enough water, eating properly, healthy food, going for walks. This is the basic. Then I personally, in time of distress, I would personally listen few seminars online that maybe can help me out. If you are going through a breakup, I also suggest you to look out for Alan Robarge. You will find it on YouTube. He's an amazing psychotherapist based in Austin, probably. I don't want to say something wrong. He's really amazing. I was listening to him like mostly every day, like a few years back during a breakup, and that really helped me. And other things I'm doing with my mental health, like in my everyday life, beside eating properly as much as I can and drinking enough water, is somatic practices, and so practicing yoga. And if you follow me on my Instagram page, which is Elisa and Yoga 108, you will see that maybe I'm posting a very fancy yoga poster where I'm doing, I don't know, headstand or something really difficult to do. But actually, my personal yoga practice would be very simple. Some days is just about breathing or being in child pose, or maybe doing something very modified with different variations. So it looks different day by day. And other things I would do is reading, because reading is not just good for the body and for the mind to calm down our nervous system, of course, accordingly with the content we're reading, but also because of the movement of the eyes, because of the reading. That movement of the eyes will tonify our vagus nerve, will help our nervous system to calm down again. That's why we feel relaxed reading. And also very often we can get in touch with a state of mindfulness. You know, you are connecting with the book in front of you. You can smell, the perfume of the paper, and you can touch. There is the sound of, going through the different pages. So different elements that help. Yeah.
This is amazing. These are many good tips. I guess before we close, I just wanted to double down on what you said in the essence of our hero Gabor Mate. He talks about how very often when we are frustrated with ourselves or think there's something wrong with us and these are our flaws, actually these are these are adaptations that we had to do as a result of difficult scenarios during our development. And I think
Absolutely.
that reframing is very important, isn't it? To just say, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. There's just, you are as you are right now because of you had to adapt, and you have the possibility to adapt further, to calm the nervous system down and become a more kind of intentional person,
Yes. And there is another point that I really want to share, because I found that as an as a eating disorder survivor, I find this really, really interesting. That I believe that was Steven Porges that mentioned about the ingestion of food, in case of bulimia or obesity. Ingestion of food to manage the emotion. And when people are experiencing a lot of guilt about this ingestion, because they believe, I can refrain from doing this. But actually in that ingestion, we are using all the facial muscles that we will use during a social interaction. So what we are actually lacking is social interaction. And we are trying to reproduce in that by ingestion.
Wow.
So I found that kind of mind-blowing, because I really found myself in that group of people that was just maybe taking food in because I was really missing communication without the outer world, or maybe I was having many relationship problem, maybe at work or even with friends, and I didn't really know, how to confront to other. And I was really missing being in a community or being with other people. So I was spending a lot of time alone, and I was using food to maybe suppress this feeling. But what he mentioned about using these facial muscles was super interesting for me. So yeah, I just leave it this.
Yeah. I'll be sure to leave links to Steven Porges and to your website and to your Instagram in the show notes for people who want to learn more after listening to the podcast. Grazie mille per il tuo tempo.
Grazie. I hope you had some fun too, looking at me moving my hands in a very Italian way.
I did.
And
I very much did. Thank you.
No, thank you so much.